You are listening to the Music Ed Mentor Podcast, where we teach music educators how to build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. I am your host, Elisa Jansen-Jones, and today's episode is a little bit different from our normal format. So I hope you'll stay with us. It's going to be great. Usually I bring on a guest and we give you some great tips and tricks to take home and apply to your own music program. But today, because it's International Women's Day, I'm going to share with you some of the stories of women in music you may or may not have heard of. These women have made some type of impact on music, who contributed in some way, and who your own students may want to emulate. If you've ever done a music history unit with your students, you've probably come to realize that the vast majority of composers we teach about are men. White men, mostly. And why is this a problem, we have to ask ourselves now? Why do we need to seek out diversity? It's because our students are diverse. We want to be able to show them that there are musical heroes, musical geniuses who look like them. This goes for recruiting too, by the way. By helping students see the diversity that reflects them, we help them envision their own future in music. And we're just exploring more options too. Which is why we need to spend at least a little effort programming music and music history lessons that feature diverse composers and artists, and why we need to be able to teach about women in music right alongside the men. I'm going to share a bit with you today about composers, artists, conductors, both living and dead, who you can spotlight in your classroom and show your students that women can be outstanding musicians too. You're going to want to check out the show notes page for this episode because there are a bunch of links and references that I used in my research for this episode, and you're going to want to grab them. There are so many great stories on these women. You might even want to expand your research more than I did. But first, I want to tell you about an opportunity for your students to shine. Smart Music and the International Music Education Summit are collaborating to create virtual honor ensembles. I can't even begin to tell you how cutting edge this is. Let me tell you how it works. Your top students use Smart Music to prepare and submit their audition material. If accepted into the ensemble, and this year there's one band and one string orchestra, then they get access to the performance literature. They get to learn their part and submit their recording of it. Then their recording is combined with those of all the other players in the ensemble to create a collaborative piece of music, which will then be presented in a live-streamed performance as part of the International Music Education Summit this June. The students also get invited to join a private Facebook group where they can virtually meet the other ensemble members from around the world and be treated to live video clinics with masters of performance as well. There's so much to this opportunity. I could almost spend an entire episode talking about it. For now, though, you can read all the details by visiting musicedsummit.org. Now, let's talk about women in music. All of us who have studied music history out of the grout will remember that one of the earliest well-known women composers and performers was Hildegard von Bingen. Hildegard was a German Benedictine abbess, a writer, a composer, a philosopher, a Christian mystic, a visionary, and a polymath. She is considered to be the founder of scientific natural history in Germany. Hildegard was elected a magistra by her fellow nuns in 1136, and she founded the monasteries of Rupertsberg in 1150 and Eibingen in 1165. One of her works as a composer, the Ordo Virtutum, is an early example of liturgical drama and arguably the oldest surviving morality play. She wrote theological, botanical, and medicinal texts, as well as letters, songs for the liturgy, and poems. She is also noted for the invention of a constructed language. In other words, she liked secret codes. She was not just a composer. Just as most of us are not just teachers. She was a naturalist whose work is still celebrated today. In addition to her play, she created 69 musical compositions, each with its own original poetic text, and at least 4 other texts that are known, though their musical notation has been lost. This is one of the largest repertoires among medieval composers. As one of the few prominent women in the medieval church history, Hildegard became the subject of increasing interest in the latter half of the 20th century. Hildegard's writings were widely translated into English. Several recordings of her music were made available, so you can learn more about her too. I don't know about you, but that feels like a really large resume for a medieval woman Benedictine abbess. But did you know there was a famous woman musician even before Hildegard? Cassia was an enigmatic poet who lived in 9th century Constantinople. She was born sometime around 805 or 810 AD and died sometime around 867. She was courageous, highly educated, and was considered beautiful. She was so beautiful, in fact, that the Emperor of Constantinople, Emperor Theophilus, wanted her as his wife. Not taken with the idea of becoming an empress, Cassia rejected his advances and chose instead to become an abbess and a poet. Cassia came from a noble family and was well educated, yet it was her prettiness that caught the eye of the emperor in the year 830 CE. In that year, according to a number of Byzantine chroniclers, Cassia appeared in a, quote, bride show. These were events in which commissioners were sent throughout the empire to find possible wives for the emperor, and then they would bring them back to Constantinople to be displayed. Now, some historians dispute whether they actually happened or if this is just a story. But according to the chroniclers, at one show, Theophilus saw Cassia and, struck by her beauty, remarked, "What a flood of base things come through women." Cassia, who was sure-footed, replied, "But also from woman better things spring." Her response, both witty and candid, espouses the Christian idea that through the Virgin Mary, Jesus brought redemption to mankind. After rejecting the hand of the emperor, Cassia became a nun at a convent. There she became a prolific poet and composer. Of the hundreds of hymn composers from the Eastern Church, only 4 women can be positively identified, and only one of these, Cassia, had her works incorporated into official service books for use in church worship. Like most composers, she also wrote some secular works as well. The British Library holds a collection of her epigrams. In it, she displays her sharp mind and sharp wit. She speaks disparagingly of thoughtlessness, writing, "There is absolutely no cure for stupidity." She went on, "Knowledge in a stupid person is a bell on a pig's snout." Cassia was also courageous. 9th century Constantinople was rocked by fierce debate over the legitimacy of religious images. But just as she was unafraid to reject the advances of the emperor, so too Cassia stood up to defend the veneration of the icons. In one of her verses, she writes, "I hate silence when it is time to speak." And her courage was not only demonstrated in her writing, but in her actions too. In another of his letters to her, Theodore thanks Cassia for helping one of his disciples who has been imprisoned by the authorities for his defense of icon worship. Cassia's best known and most popular work is a hymn for Holy Wednesday, in which she gives voice to a nameless woman from the Gospels. The woman appears in an episode of the Gospels whereby Christ, dining in the house of a wealthy man, is anointed by a woman whom Luke describes as having led a sinful life. A fine copy of Cassia's poem survives in a 16th century manuscript held by the British Library, where Cassia imagines the woman's lament. The text reads, "Woe is me, for the love of adultery surrounded me with darkness, a lightless night of sin. Accept the springs of my tears, as you who disperse the waters from the sea, from the clouds, bow down to the sighs of my heart. As you bent the heavens by your inapprehensible incarnation, I kiss your purest feet and wipe them with my own tresses. I kiss your feet whose tread Eve heard in paradise, where, frightened, she hid herself in fear. Who can count the multitude of my sin and the depths of your judgment? Wherefore, O my Savior and the Redeemer of my soul, do not turn away from your handmaiden, as your mercy is boundless." Of course, you all know about Clara Schumann. She was a remarkable pianist and composer and was a true pioneer who had a profound impact on the history of music. Clara Schumann, she was born Clara Weck, is considered one of the most talented and distinguished composer-pianists of the Romantic era. Starting young, she was considered a child prodigy. Her father made her practice for 2 or more hours a day alongside her daily piano, violin, singing, theory, harmony, composition, and counterpoint lessons. At the tender age of 13, Clara was one of the first pianists to perform from memory. That started a trend that lasts to this day, and it is now standard practice for most professional pianists to perform memorized. She was known to perform always in a white dress. She met composer Robert Schumann when she was only 8 years old. Their friendship eventually blossomed into love, though Clara's father was against the relationship and even threatened to shoot Robert should he go through with the marriage. Johannes Brahms was also in love with Clara, some say, but she was married to his best friend. Robert Schumann's mental health deteriorated later in life, and he was eventually admitted into an asylum. When this happened, Brahms came to stay at their home to help support the family. Clara and Brahms's relationship maybe blossomed to more than friendship, though it is unclear exactly what went on. This love triangle holds a position as one of the most retold love stories in music history. Brahms once wrote to Clara to declare his feelings. Quote, "I wish I could write to you as tenderly as I love you and tell you all the good things I wish you." She earned most of the money in the Schumann household, which was extremely unusual at the time. Clara's work has often been marginalized by people claiming her husband was the real composer behind her works, but we all know better. The couple worked together on some songs, but her pieces were in fact more popular than his at the time, and both Schumann and Brahms owe some of their fame to her performing their music. The Schumanns had 10 children. That's right, 10 children. This year marks the 200th anniversary of Clara Schumann's birth. To celebrate the legacy of this great virtuoso and composer, St. John Smith's Square in London is presenting an entire festival dedicated to her life and work. Moving on, Sister Rosetta was the first guitar heroine of rock and roll. Her heartfelt gospel folksiness gave way to her roaring mastery of her Gibson SG guitar, which she wielded on a level that rivaled even the best of her male contemporaries. Sister Rosetta Tharpe is one of the essential figures in the history of rock and roll. If she had not been there as a model and inspiration, Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, and other rock originators would have had completely different careers. No one deserves more to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame than Sister Rosetta. Sister Rosetta became famous in 1938 with a record called Rock Me. She was a star throughout the 1940s, a Black woman singing gospel music to the accompaniment of her own driving electric guitar, howling and stamping along. Her 1945 recording, quote, "Strange Things Happening Every Day," has been credited as the first gospel song to cross over to R&B charts, reaching number 2 and becoming an early model for rock and roll. She was a sensation, selling out arenas into the 1950s. In 1947, Sister Rosetta was the first person to put a 14-year-old boy named Little Richard Penniman on stage. It changed Little Richard's life. He decided right then and there to become a performer. In 1951, 25,000 fans paid to attend her on-stage wedding at Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C. She was the hottest act on stage with a guitar. She became a model for Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, and so many more. Johnny Cash called her his favorite singer and best inspiration. By the early 60s, the musical revolution she inspired had forgotten her, so Sister Rosetta went to England and played electric guitar for the young blues fans of London and Liverpool. Without Sister Rosetta Tharpe, rock and roll would be a different kind of music. She is the founding mother who gave rock's founding fathers the idea. Of the forgotten and underappreciated pioneers of electronic music, no one deserves to be championed like Delia Derbyshire, who, in her decades of experimentation, altered the very fabric in which electronic music is understood. Misogyny runs rampant in the way musical history is represented and presented, and it's often most prevalent in conversations about music with a relationship to science or technology, and the stigma about women in STEM persists today. But Derbyshire did not allow herself to be limited by prevailing expectations of her, or any era. She became a founder of Musique Concrete and one of the most important voices in electronic music. Experimental recording owes much to this woman who refused to be rejected. Derbyshire was born in Coventry, England in 1937. In her youth, she quickly showcased an undeniable intellect and understanding of the congruency between math and music. She studied at Girton College in Cambridge and, after graduating, applied for a recording position at Decca Records. She was immediately denied. According to the 2010 BBC documentary about her life, she was told by a representative that the studio was no place for a woman. All that changed in 1960 when she went to work at the BBC as a studio manager. She soon became enamored of the Radiophonic Workshop, a division of the media conglomerate dedicated to electronic experimentation. The invention of tape recording in the 1950s allowed sounds to be manipulated in entirely new ways. In a time when radio dramas ruled popular entertainment, the workshop was a creative and coveted place of employment. In 1962, Derbyshire was assigned a position at the workshop where she'd work for over a decade, becoming a sound specialist and a leading voice in musical counterculture. The weirder her soundscapes became, the more wondrous they felt. She created music for the world's first fashion show with an electronic soundtrack. And considering the commonality of techno and dance music on the runway, she left a legacy in that field too. She organized robotic noise in a way that truly felt alien. Shocking sounds whole decades ahead of this music's time. Since writing her first #1 hit, Will You Love Me Tomorrow, at the tender age of 17, Carole King has arguably become the most celebrated and iconic singer-songwriter of all time. In 1960, Carole made her solo debut with a song called Babysittin', and 2 years later, her demo of It Might As Well Rain Until September made the top 25 in the United States and climbed all the way to #3 on the British chart. In 1967, Goffin and King's Natural Woman was immortalized by Aretha Franklin, and to date, more than 400 of her compositions have been recorded by more than 1,000 artists, resulting in 100 hit singles. Carol's 1971 solo album, Tapestry, took her to the summit. While she was recording Tapestry, James Taylor recorded King's You've Got a Friend, taking the song all the way to number 1. In a first for a female writer-artist, Tapestry spawned 4 Grammy Awards: Record, Song, and Album of the Year, as well as Best Pop Vocal Performance, all female honors for Carol. With more than 25 million units sold worldwide, Tapestry remained the best-selling album by a female artist for a quarter of a century, and Carol went on to amass 3 other platinum and 8 gold albums. Tapestry was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1998. In 1987, Carol was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and a year later, Goffin and King were awarded the National Academy of Songwriters Lifetime Achievement Award. In 1990, the duo was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and in 2002, Carol was honored with the prestigious Johnny Mercer Award from the Songwriters Hall of Fame. The past 5 years have been among the busiest and most successful of Carol's career. She's been the recipient of a number of esteemed awards and honors and remained active in the public's eye with musical and literary work. Carol's many late career achievements include a 50th anniversary Troubadour reunion run with James Taylor that became the RIAA Gold Certified Live at the Troubadour, inspiring the pair's 60-concert Troubadour Reunion World Tour in 2010. She's published a memoir, A Natural Woman, in 2012, which debuted on the New York Times bestseller list at number 6 and prompted Vanity Fair to say, "America is having a Carole King moment." In addition to her continuously evolving musical career, Carol, who has lived on an Idaho ranch since the early 1980s, is actively involved with environmental organizations in support of wilderness preservation. The first woman inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was Aretha Franklin. She was an artist of passion, sophistication, and command, whose recordings remain anthems that defined soul music. In Aretha Franklin's sprawling career, she has taken on many roles: the devout gospel singer, the sensual R&B siren, the pop crossover phenomenon, the lady of soul. She dominated them all. She is a singer of great passion and control, whose finest recordings define the term soul music in all its deep, expressive glory. Quote, "I don't think there's anybody I have known who possesses an instrument like hers and who has such a thorough background in gospel, the blues, and the essential music idiom, where much of Franklin's best work was done. Quote, she is blessed with an extraordinary combination of remarkable urban sophistication and deep blues feeling. The result is maybe the greatest singer of our time." Unquote. Aretha was born in Memphis and grew up in Detroit. Her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, was the charismatic pastor at New Bethel Baptist Church, which he turned into a large and thriving institution. His services were broadcast locally and in other urban markets around the country. On the musical side, some of the greatest vocalists of the gospel era were acquaintances and guests in the Franklin household. Aretha and her siblings, her sisters Irma and Carolyn, and brothers Cecil and Vaughn, grew up hearing the likes of Clara Ward, Malia Jackson, and James Cleveland, both in their father's church and in the family's living room. From an early age, Aretha sang at her father's behest during services at New Bethel. Her first recordings turned up on an album called Spirituals, recorded at the church when she was only 14. Spirituals was released locally on the JVB label in 1956 and re-released in 1962. Aretha's 5 tracks formed the basis of the 1964 album Songs of Faith, the gospel sounds of Aretha Franklin. Although she was firmly rooted in gospel, Franklin also drew from such blues and jazz legends as Billie Holiday, Dinah Washington, and Sarah Vaughan as she developed her own singing style. On the male side, she was inspired by Ray Charles, Nat King Cole, and Sam Cooke. From the emerging world of youthful doo-wop groups and early soul, Aretha enjoyed the likes of Laverne Baker, Ruth Brown, Little Willie John, the Falcons, and Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. Out of an array of all these influences, both sacred and secular, Franklin forged a contemporary synthesis that would speak to the 60s generation in the revolutionary new language of soul music. Franklin's greatest triumph and an enduring milestone in popular music was Respect. Her fervent reworking of the Otis Redding penned number can be viewed in hindsight as an early assertion of selfhood in the women's movement. It was the opening track on I Never Loved a Man the Way I Loved You from 1967, her classic first album. Other memorable tracks from this pivotal release are Do Right Woman, Do Right Man, Dr. Feelgood, and her cover of A Change Is Gonna Come. Aretha's career continued for the next 4 decades. As a measure of her impact, Aretha Franklin has charted 43 top 40 singles since 1961. She's also earned 18 Grammy Awards, the most recent coming in 2007. In addition, she has sung at the inaugurations of 2 U.S. presidents, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, and received the Presidential Medal of Honor from George W. Bush. Franklin suffered some health issues in 2010, including broken ribs and a major surgery. And yet, she released a new album in 2011 and returned to live performing in better health and high spirits. If Aretha was the queen of soul, Madonna was the queen of pop. She is an American singer-songwriter, actress, and businesswoman. She's known for pushing the boundaries of songwriting in mainstream popular music and for the imagery she uses on stage and in music videos. Madonna has frequently reinvented her music and image while maintaining autonomy within the recording industry. Although having sparked controversy, her works have been praised by music critics. Madonna is often cited as an influence by other artists. She was born and raised in Michigan and moved to New York City in 1978 to pursue a career in modern dance. After performing as a drummer, a guitarist, and a vocalist in rock bands Breakfast Club and Emmy, Madonna signed with Sire Records in 1982 and released her debut album the next year. She followed it with a series of successful albums, including global bestsellers Like a Virgin, True Blue, and Grammy Award winners Ray of Light and Confessions on a Dance Floor. Throughout her career, Madonna has written and produced most of her own songs, including #1 hits like a Virgin, La Isla Bonita, Like a Prayer, Vogue, Take a Bow, Frozen, Music, Hung Up, and 4 Minutes. Madonna's popularity has been further enhanced by her roles in film as well. Evita, her portrayal of Evita in Evita, earned her a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress. Her other ventures include fashion design, children's books, health clubs, and filmmaking. She contributes to various charities, having founded the Ray of Light Foundation in 1998 and Raising Malawi in 2006. Madonna, just like many of the female composers and artists before her, has become truly a Renaissance woman, not just keeping to music roots, but offering so much more to the world around her. Having sold more than 300 million records worldwide, Madonna is noted as the best-selling female recording artist of all time by Guinness World Records. Of course, if we're talking about revolutionary women in the modern age, we have to talk about Björk Gudmundsdóttir. She's an Icelandic singer, songwriter, composer, actress, record producer, and DJ. Over her 4-decade career, she has developed an eclectic musical style that draws on a range of influences and genres spanning electronic, pop, experimental, classical, trip-hop, IDM, and avant-garde music. She was born and raised in Reykjavik, and she began her music career at age 11. She first gained international recognition as the lead singer of the alternative rock band The Sugar Cubes, whose 1987 single, Birthday, was a hit on US and UK indie stations and a favorite among music critics. After the band's breakup, Björk embarked on a solo career in 1993, coming to prominence as a solo artist with debut albums such as Debut, Post, and Homogenic, while collaborating with a range of artists and exploring a variety of multimedia projects. Several of Björk's albums have reached the top 20 on the Billboard 200 chart, the most recent being from 2015. She's had 31 singles reach the top 40 on pop charts around the world, with 22 top 40 hits in the UK. Like many of the other women that we've talked about, she's won so many prizes. So be sure to go and check out all of the links and the show notes so that you can discover more about her. Outside of her music career, Björk starred in the 2000 movie Lars von Trier film Dancer in the Dark, for which she won the Best Actress Award at the 2000 Cannes Film Festival and was nominated for Academy Award for Best Original Song for I've Seen It All. Her 2011 album, Biophilia, was marketed as an interactive app album with its own educational program. Björk has also been an advocate for environmental causes in her home country of Iceland. A full-scale retrospective exhibition dedicated to Björk was held at the New York Museum of Modern Art in 2015. There are so many more amazing women you can explore with your students. So these are my honorable mentions, like Maren Alsop. She made history when she became the first female to conduct a major U.S. symphony when appointed to the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra in 2007. 6 years later, she made history again when she became the first woman to conduct the last night of the proms. The French pianist Louise Ferenc was appointed to the Paris Conservatoire in 1842 and remained there for 30 years. She was the first woman in Europe to be an instrumental professor at a conservatory, although for the first 10 years of her time there, she was paid less than her male counterparts. Frank was also a composer, and her music was particularly admired by Schumann. Her third symphony was included in The Guardian's recent 50 Greatest Symphonies series. The British conductor, Andrea Quinn, former music director of the Royal Ballet and New York City Ballet, has conducted most of the world's leading ballet companies. The director of the Orchestra Sinfonica di Milano, Giuseppe Verdi, since 2009, Chinese-American conductor Zhang Zheng conducted a program of Verdi arias with Joseph Kalena at the 2013 proms and regularly guest conducts the London Symphony Orchestra. And of course, we have to talk about a woman who's on her way to an EGOT. That means she'll probably eventually have an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony Award. Just tell your students about Lady Gaga. There are so many more amazing and brilliant composers, conductors, and of course, music educators that are women. You'll want to visit the show notes page to snag all the links you can use when planning your own lessons on amazing women musicians. I hope that you've enjoyed this brief encounter with some women that you may have known and some that maybe you didn't. I do hope you take the time to research them some more and learn all about the Renaissance women that they are and that your own students can emulate. Remember to spread the word about the Smart Music Virtual Honor Ensembles for your own students and students in your area. Learn more about this great opportunity at musicedsummit.org. Until next time, keep teaching on.